I'd like to welcome everybody to our August meeting of the ECI Regional Planning District to order.
You have a quorum, sir, and you can proceed.
We'll go ahead and do roll call. We'll do roundtable roll call. We'll go around the room and say your name and who you represent. Go this way, please.
Rick Glock, town of Yorktown.
I'm just on the marketing team for ECI.
Gary Thompson, AmeriCorps service member, here.
Seth Stegall with ECI.
Seth Robinson with ECI.
Jerome Center, how the ECI SADS intern.
Ray Allen, I represent Muncie.
Pete Peterson, RQAW, also Fisher City Council, also a friend of the senators. You have the tendency to help them on occasion and Hamilton County when I can. So.
Nick Kimball, ECI.
I'm Shannon Henry, Delaware County Commissioner.
Brian McGalliard, Jay County Commissioner.
Steve Wright, Grant County Commissioner.
Justin Sadel, Grant County Administrator.
Rob Keesling, appointed by Delaware County Commissioner.
Jessica Piper, Delaware County Council President.
Jensen Glaze, town of Selma.
James Hogan, the Environmental Liability and Asset Management.
Dan Ridenhour, Mayor of Muncie.
Michelle Batters, ECI Administrator.
Todd Young, U.S. Marine Corps.
I'm Kathy Vance, Mayor for the City of Montpelier.
I'm Shane Middlesworth, Grant County Council President.
I'm Bill Walters, Executive Director of East Central Indiana's Regional Planning District. Back in the back.
Steve Brogan from Daleville Town Board.
Last but not least, Randy Dunning, Albany Town Council.
Anyone else?
You miss anybody?
Next item before us today will be the approval of the May 16th minutes. You should have received an electronic copy as well as a copy in front of you. Is there any amendments that need to be made to the minutes? If not, I entertain a motion of approval.
So moved.
Is there a second? I have a motion and a second. The minutes are from the Tuesday, May the 16th at 3 here at Delaware County High Meeting. Any other questions? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Minutes are approved. Next, we'll have the treasurer's report.
For January through July 2023, the profit and loss statement shows total income of $380,596.54. Total expenses, $306,230.59. And a net income of $74,365.95. And on your balance sheet, as of July 31st, you'll notice total assets, $324,796.32. And the total liabilities and equity of $324,796.32.
Are there any questions regarding the treasurer's report? If there are no questions, I'd entertain a motion.
So made.
Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Treasurer's report is approved. This time I'll turn it over to Bill.
Moving to the guest speaker today. Senator Todd Young represents Hoosiers in the United States. He currently serves on the Senate Committees on Finance, Foreign Relations, Commerce, Science and Transportation, and Small Business and Entrepreneurship. Todd is a graduate of the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. He graduated with honors in 1995 and accepted a commission in the U.S. Marine Corps. In 2000, Todd was honorably discharged from the Marine Corps as a captain. While serving in the Marines and working as a business consultant, Todd earned an MBA and his law degree. In 2010, he ran for Congress and served 3 terms representing Indiana's 9th District. He was elected to the U.S. Senate in 2016. Todd married his wife Jenny in 2005 and worked together at a small law firm in Paoli, Indiana, started by Jenny's grandfather. Today they reside in Johnson County, Indiana, with their 4 children and son Tucker, their 3 daughters, Annalisa?
Yeah.
So I want to make sure I said it all right. Abigail and Ava. Ladies and gentlemen, Senator Todd Young.
Well, thanks for having me. It's delightful to be with all of you. I'm
traveling the highways and byways of the state this month and sharing with you what I'm working on and also hearing from you. What are your priorities, what current events might I have missed, and in the end, I'm always trying to figure out how I can be helpful in additional ways. I think we're going to have an opportunity, as I understand it, maybe to have some Q&A today, and I'll look forward to receiving whatever questions you have. But know that I'm spending a lot of my time in what I think is a bit of a distinctive role for a U.S. Senator, finding myself involved sort of in economic development. Our state is heavily involved in manufacturing, of course. We're the most manufacturing intensive state in the country. I passed some legislation that's really important to our national security, but it also is manufacturing legislation. I see a real role here for Hoosiers to get more deeply involved in some high value added activities, and we'll probably dive more deeply into some of these topics today.
We have some questions for you at the executive board, so Randy, would you like to start?
Yeah, I will. You have long been a proponent of advancing national security from your days as a Marine to your corresponding with the CHIPS and Science Act. The state has been working towards securing a regional tech and innovation hub.
Yes.
Can you share more about why the CHIPS and Science Act is critical to Indiana and what it could mean for the state?
Well, thank you. That's the legislation I was alluding to. So many of you, I suspect, are somewhat familiar with the CHIPS and Science Act. When I was campaigning for office, and let me be clear, I'm not campaigning now. I've got 5.5 years ahead of me, and I look forward to using that. But one of the things I emphasized when I was campaigning was this legislative effort, which we were blessedly able to get across the line a few months before the November election. But essentially what it does is it incentivizes manufacturing companies to reshore our manufacturing capabilities for semiconductors. You know, the computer chips that are in your cell phones, that are in our toasters, that are in our ballistic missile submarines as well. So it has national security implications, and we have to have our own supply. But we also need our own supply domestically, or access, ready access to these chips, so you can run a modern economy. Otherwise, our auto assembly plants will idle the next time we have another pandemic or, God forbid, a geopolitical interruption. So we create the requisite incentives to do this. We make some investments in workforce, but beyond the whole CHIPS piece of it is the and science piece, investment in research through places like Ball State University or Indiana University, Purdue University. Investment in the workforce to fill the jobs of tomorrow. And then lastly, you mentioned tech hubs. State of Indiana has, as of yesterday, we submitted a tech hub proposal so that when we develop really high value added products like new pharmaceutical solutions at Eli Lilly, or we come up with new crop strains at Purdue University, we don't have to ship that intellectual property overseas to China or another place in Asia, typically, sometimes to Europe, in order to scale up production until we get to a point where it's worth our while to produce. We actually have the assets right here in Indiana to scale up a lot of these farm or pharma life sciences areas. But we need to make some infrastructure investments. So your smaller innovators who aren't Eli Lilly or who aren't Elanco, when they have an innovation, they can contract another entity to go start manufacturing it. Then once you get to requisite scale, then your Elancos and your Lillys are interested in acquiring that capability. But it's the mid-level capability which is so important otherwise. We take our crown jewels of intellectual property, we outsource it to another country, again, it's oftentimes China, to produce this stuff. They steal your IP. And then you reshore it here, and fine, we got manufacturing jobs, but you also have a lower wage competitor. So let's just cut out the middlemen and continue to make it here in the industrial Midwest. And I think we'll land this. I think this tech hub will be landed, and it's exciting. I hope for this area as well, because we're going to need a lot of manufacturing workers, and I've already visited with Ball State, and I mean, All-State has a real history of entrepreneurship and innovation. I think many of the workers who are skilled either go there or Ivy Tech. There are, of course, campuses in this region, and so there'll be some opportunities, not for every Hoosier worker, I don't want to overstate it, but for a lot of them in coming years.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Next.
You recently became a commissioner to the National Security Commission on Emerging Biotechnology.
Yes.
Could you talk about that commission and your priorities specifically as they relate to biotechnology and its application to Indiana's economy?
Yes, Mayor, happy to. So the National Security Commission on Synthetic Biology. Synthetic biology is just life sciences. It's life sciences for those who want to sound smart when saying it. But when we think of life sciences, we think of kind of the traditional areas like Corteva, which is the ag side, or Eli Lilly. Increasingly, in labs around the world, people are figuring out how to manipulate genes and living things and turn them into actual physical products, like material science. Okay, so this is where it's really interesting. State of Indiana, you got life sciences, which is kind of like a business vertical. And that's, subsets of that pharma and ag, as we've already established. But then you got over here, you got manufacturing. The two begin to converge at some point, but when you figure out how to make new products, make new materials by manipulating things. We ought to own that here in our area, because we're so good at the other stuff, and science is science is science. So let's mix our talent across them. So what is a commission? The commission looks at national security implications of advancements in life science. If you can make new materials, you can probably also make materials that are of concern to DoD. Are the Chinese going to use this science to make new types of munitions that we're unable to defend against, that our tanks aren't strong enough to defend against? Will the Chinese, and I keep using them as the example, because frankly they're a near peer threat this generation. Will the Chinese use this same science to develop superbugs that could be used biologically to target their adversaries, like the United States? So those are the downside risks that have to be managed, and we're coming up with recommendations for our policymakers, Congress, and the executive branch to manage those risks. But we want to own the upside. We want to figure out how to harness this science, come up with a light touch regulatory atmosphere so that we can come up with breakthroughs to Alzheimer's disease, so that we can come up with the best materials ourselves. And so we don't have the recommendations yet. I will be, as mostly these are innovators and entrepreneurs, a few investors, and then a couple of legislators like myself. So it's mostly people who've done this their whole professional lives. And when the recommendations are received, I'll have some ownership over them since I've served on this committee. And to the extent our state can benefit from these things, I'm on the inside track to help us do so. So that's trying to compress it. It's a big topic.
Big one.
Yeah.
It is.
I believe I have the next question. Artificial intelligence is ever expanding and increasingly relevant in the workplace and personal life. You're working on some bipartisan efforts to expand AI research. Could you talk a little bit about AI and your efforts?
Yeah, this is sort of, I guess I've got the whole portfolio of issues that will scare a lot of regular people, right? Artificial intelligence and synthetic biology, but AI is another one. And before you think about the scary stuff, think about all the incredible opportunities that AI could bring. I mean, AI is really, and it's been around for a while. 1950s, there's a guy by the name of Alan Turing, who's like a real innovator in the computer space. He was talking about AI. What has changed, and the reason we're all focused on AI right now, is you got some of these they're called large language models. they seem so smart, it's almost like if you played around with them, there's some free versions online, go to ChatGPT and raise your hand if anyone's just so, okay, so a lot of you have. I'd encourage you to, if you haven't, sort of fun. Please write a paper about this. Please, write a speech about this, and within a tenth of a second, it's the best speech you've ever read. May not all be true, but
Sounds really good.
yeah, it sounds really good. Yeah, does that sound familiar to anyone?
All my interns are looking at each other right now, because I call them out on it.
Yeah. So that's caught a lot of people's attention. It's actually concerned a lot of people too, because this just seems too smart for its own good. And you can generate images. Maybe you've seen a picture of the Pope, who has this puffy white jacket on, and like it's the Pope went skiing, but it never happened. But it looks so real, so it has to be real. So there's increasing concern that this technology could be used by bad actors, individuals, nation states, whatever, to come up with what are the ingredients sourced from my local hardware to make a superbug. Okay, maybe you could tell you that. Generate a false image of a politician right before an election doing this. Okay, send it all out. I mean, there's all kinds of ways you can conceive of that this could be misused. So we want to manage those risks. But at the same time, you want to harness the amazing processing capabilities of all this information and come up with smarter ways to do things and breakthroughs when you're developing new cures to horrible diseases. And right now, the United States is way ahead when it comes to artificial intelligence technology. We don't want others to get ahead. The way we stay ahead is we make sure this technology evolves consistent with our values. So we already have laws to define what our values are. We don't discriminate against people based on racial and ethnic groups. So when they go to apply for a loan, we want to make sure that an AI technology isn't doing that. We want to make sure that, it's already illegal in many contexts to lie or to deceive people. You want to make sure that that's not happening through deepfake technology. It's illegal to make harmful substances and disseminate them out across the world. So we need to adapt these laws to this new AI world that we live in, and we're not there. So I'm part of a group within the Congress. There's 4 of us, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, that are trying to figure out how we sort of embed the expertise within government to write new rules where we have to, or to tell Congress, hey, we need some new authorities or different authorities to deal with this risk on an ongoing basis. Then we can continue to develop the technology and all benefit from it. So at its highest level, that's what we're doing. And we're all going to have to prepare for a world, for better or for worse, where it just moves even faster. And for those of us who sometimes want everything just to slow down, myself included, there's just no way around this. So all of us are going to have to up our game, from training and retraining people for new jobs, figuring out how to process a lot more information in our personal lives on a very rapid basis, on and on and on. And pretty difficult to escape it, so we just want to do our best to kind of harness it.
Hold on to it.
Yeah.
Okay. Senator, a challenge confronting this region and every region in Indiana is housing.
Yeah.
You are championing different pieces of legislation to help address housing. What are those priorities?
Is this an issue around here?
Yes, big issue. We have issues
Okay.
in several, across the region, not only in Delaware County, but from Jay to Grant and everything in between. We have housing that is needed in this area. We all know it. I've talked to several of the commissioners, several of the mayors throughout the region.
Yeah.
And this is, if not number 1, it's 2 or 3 on their list at the top of every one of their.
Well, that's what we call a leading question in the business, all right? Because I knew it was an issue in this region, because I held roundtable conversations in 2016 when I was campaigning for Congress or for the Senate the first time, and then the first year that I was serving, I didn't expect housing policy really to be one of the things I was working on your behalf in Washington. But I did promise people, I said, when I go to Washington, I'm gonna make sure that the things I'm working on connect to your daily lives. And if there's something you really think I need to work on, I'm gonna work on it. And so this one was something that, as we held the roundtable session, people brought to me. So I studied the cost drivers and the supply demand issues, because normally I think markets work and they work very well. One of the reasons markets aren't working very well when it comes to housing is we had a financial crisis sort of prompted by government action. Remember that? It was pre-2010, right around that time frame. And so many of our contractors went out of business. It takes time to reconstitute. So you just can't find enough people to build the housing stock that's needed these days. And to the extent you can, there's not enough competition between them. So not enough supply, same amount of demand, and what happens? Price goes up, rents as well as mortgages. That's one of the drivers. We've had some supply input challenges because of trade issues. It becomes more complex, but here in Indiana, that contractor issue looms very large. So here are a few things that I thought could be helpful. I also discovered local rules and regulations, land use issues. Varies a lot by geography, but can be a big cost driver. I'll pick on Bloomington, Indiana, Monroe, because I'm not there. But also because even their own residents will tell you, we've got very tough zoning and land use policies. So that also drives up the cost. If you say, well, you gotta have this much setback per property, and you gotta have all these aesthetic features on each structure, cost keeps going up for each of these decisions. So here's some ideas, and we've turned them into policy. One is see what's working in government. One of the things that has historically worked pretty well is the low-income housing tax credit program. It's for people of modest means who work. These are working poor or working lower middle class, but they're working. They're doing their best, and they want to live where the jobs are. In fact, if you can't find housing near where the jobs are, they're probably not going to work there. So we need a more generous LIHTC program, because we lowered tax rates a few years ago, then each of the allocated credits are worth less. So that was an easy fix, cost some money. That was my number one contribution. Number two, how do I deal with local land use policies that frankly are they're decisions from localities, and it's not the federal government who comes up with these decisions. We shouldn't. This is zoning and land use stuff that should be the prerogative of the locals. But there ought to be transparency in these policies, because what happens, historically, you've seen zoning land use policies used for illegal reasons. Hard to crack down on that. Keep certain people out, whatever. Okay, everyone agrees that's wrong. It's hard to deal with that. But we can identify those zoning land use policies that have been most used for that. We want visibility into those decisions. The other thing is, most people don't come to their local meetings, okay? I live in little Bargersville, Indiana. I have no idea what's discussed in my local meetings, and I'm pretty attentive to civics, okay? And it gets harder and harder with all this information we have. It gets harder with no local newspapers anymore. So the solution we landed on, dealing with far left, far right, and everyone in between, and no one dislikes this idea, is when you send a locality a community development block grant dollar, they have to report across about 15 different areas that historically drive up housing costs a lot or keep people out. No one's griped about it because we're not running, as long as you report, say here's why we did it, then your citizens can see why you did different things, and you have a more transparent process, and Hoosiers aren't sending ridiculous amounts of taxpayer money to New York or to California to pay for their ridiculous land use policies. and pay for housing. So that's the Yes in My Backyard Act. That will become law. And then the last one is something I stumbled on actually here in this geography. I was walking around Muncie. This was before you became mayor.
I was with you on one of them, but you've done it twice, I think you walked around.
Yes, you're with me on one of them. And listen, every community has old houses, charming old houses that you look at and say, God, if only, right? If only we had the resources to fix that beautiful thing up and maybe do it to the whole block and this place could just be transformed. Well, we know what the problem is. The cost of acquisition plus the cost of fixing up, it just doesn't work. It's still not worth enough to sell it on the open market. So how do you fix that problem? Through a tax credit that fills that value gap. So we've come up with a way that owner-occupiers can put skin in the game. They have to put significant own resources into it, be eligible for that credit. Or different groups of people. This not-for-profit could theoretically come together and say, okay, we know where the opportunities are. We're going to buy up whole blocks. We're going to buy up individual houses. We're going to fix them up. We're going to put them back on the market. And then once they're occupied, we'll be eligible for these tax credits. And we can sell them to folks. So we've come up with a way to do that. And it's getting all kinds of national attention. So that's what I've done on housing policy.
Cool. The National Defense Act, Authorization Act. Oh, there.
It will. It's going to. Okay.
The National Defense Authorization Act recently passed the Senate before the August recess. You supported the legislation that helped with some key pieces to that bill. What were your priorities?
I'll just say a few real quickly because I've taken a while on some of the questions,
yes.
But it's kind of a rat-tat-tat because it's National Defense Bill. This funds your troops. It funds all your military investments. I was able to get the law changed so that when we permit these chip fabs, each dollar goes a lot further. So you can get, rather than have to wait 5-10 years for an environmental permit, we said this is a national security investment. It's critical to our economic security. A really compressed amount of time. So that's number one. Number two thing I've focused on is trade policy. We make more bits and bytes kind of things in this country, selling digital services, selling things online that aren't physical, they're just digital. And so I know there's a lot of debate about trade and what kind of trade policy we should have as a country, but everyone knows the U.S. leads when it comes to this digital trade area. I thought it'd be an easy area to have signal that in a bipartisan way the administration needs to go forge some digital trade agreements. So we were able to get that in, just a resolution. Some synthetic biology stuff, pay raise for our troops. We've had some serious recruiting challenges for our troops right now, so I really pushed a lot for that. And there are some other things. I'm forgetting them. It's a massive, but if anyone has any questions about it, I'm happy to give you more answers. Yeah.
You're ready, you got number 6.
Am I supposed to be doing 6 or 7? 7 now?
6.
Okay, sorry. We switched the order up here a little bit. Indiana and
Go off
the United
script. I'm pretty
States.
comfortable if you need to.
You're going to get that here in a few
You
minutes.
didn't know we went out of order, did you?
No, that's all right.
Indiana and the U.S. are competing in a global economy and often competing against actors who do not share our values. That's putting it lightly.
Yeah.
You have been focused on economic coercion perpetuated by some of America's competitors.
Mm-hmm.
So talk about this practice of economic coercion and what you're doing to address that.
Probably the best way to talk about it is just provide a couple of examples. I visited Taiwan in January. As the first member of Congress, this Congress, to visit Taiwan. Of course, China claims the island nation of Taiwan, where all our semiconductors are made. So if they were to seize that, it would be a real issue for us. When I was in Taiwan, the government said, what can you do about the coercion? What? What coercion? Economic coercion. What do you mean, Madam President? Well, you know, the Chinese buy 80% of our pineapples, and our pineapple growers are very important, you know, it's part of our culture, part of our economy, and part of our political constituency too. And one day the leadership in Taipei said something or did something which really irked Xi Jinping, the leader of China, and the next day, the pineapples were rejected throughout China. No pineapples. So they're like, they had to stop shipping pineapples. What's going on here? And then they found out what they had said that was wrong. And they were faced with a decision: do I have to walk it back? Do I have to change our government policy in Taiwan so that we can keep selling those pineapples? Or can we find someone to help us out? In that case, the Japanese bought up all the pineapples. They called it freedom fruit. Remember freedom fries? They called it freedom fruit. And that's an example of what we're trying to facilitate. We want the United States to work with the Japanese, to work with the Australians and others, to empower especially small Asian Pacific countries, but this applies to Lithuania. They're on the receiving end of Chinese coercion not too long ago. To empower them to do what's in their own interest. We're not trying to apply pressure, but we're going to allow you to be sovereign countries rather than kowtowing to the Chinese Communist Party by providing a support mechanism. And so what our president needed to do that was he needs the ability to, in very rapid fashion, either send some foreign assistance or expedite the receipt of foreign goods or services into this country. Usually that involves like weeks or months of debate in Congress or customs or custom laws, but he needs some emergency ability to work with our partners and allies to deal with it. So I have given him, under this legislation, it will give him the authority. It's being debated because some members of Congress, and I actually respect this view, it's listen, that's our responsibility. It's a little too much to the executive branch, and I tend to be jealous of giving, the president more authority. But we have the ability almost immediately under my legislation to say, okay, we disagree with it. We all will vote on our disagreement and to eliminate his actions. So anyhow, that's what it is. Countering economic coercion. And I think some version of this will probably become law in the next, year or two. The Japanese, I introduced mine about a year ago. Since then, the Japanese have introduced their own legislation to expand their prime minister's powers. The Australians haven't introduced theirs, so it's kind of time for us to get into the game.
Congress is working on the Farm Bill, and you have been a proponent of uplifting and ensuring the U.S. food security, linking it to national security. Many countries dealing with famine have a ban on GMOs.
Yeah.
How are you in this Congress and this administration advocating for the use of science-based approaches to advance the global trade as it relates to agriculture?
I call it genetically enhanced products. Because that's what you're doing. You allow something to become more resilient through a crop strain or to grow faster. You heard of Aqua Bounty?
Yeah.
Some of you have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been there a few times.
It's a little salmon company right around here. And they were waiting for years and years and years to create jobs across the Midwest, including in this community, by growing a genetically enhanced salmon. This thing grows like 4 times a natural salmon's speed, if I recall. So 4 times the speed, about the same amount of inputs. I'm no genius because it's going to be a lot cheaper to feed folks with high quality protein. And so that's really what we're talking about. It's not just creating jobs and helping businesses. It's it's feeding the world, including our own people, at a much lower cost. And so I've been kind of pressing the issue, both in the ag bill. We're gonna pass a farm bill, I hope, in the next couple of months, and I've got some priorities as among them. Make sure that we maintain research for this sort of activity, but also that we're advocating heavily with our partners and allies. So we have enough people in our embassies to make this a priority, and change their trade agreements with these countries. And we'll get progress over time just because of the logic of it. There's no other way people are gonna, especially when you have concerns about climate, there's no other way you're going to have the food productivity needed to feed these growing populations without genetic enhancement.
Agreed. No, and I'd like to say personally, thank you. I know Shannon Henry's back here. We, 2 years ago, we worked at your office, Nancy Martinez.
Yes.
You got involved. We got Aqua Bounty over. We got what we needed to move that to the next step. Yes, there's a factory now in Ohio, but we've still got the one here in Indiana that is
Yes.
growing. So thank you for what you did there. Your office did a great job. We hit a brick wall and we couldn't get it over the line. And Nancy and you guys jumped in. We appreciate it here.
Thank you. Thanks. I've got a great team. So
You do have a great
if there's
team.
ever any stuff like that, don't assume that, you shouldn't get in touch. Probably should.
They answer the phone. I give them that. Last question we have, Senator. Last year, Congress failed to extend a provision in the tax code allowing American employers to immediately deduct R&D expenses. For the first time in 70 years, business now must amortize these investments over the course of 5 years rather than 100% annually. You introduced a bill to restore and expand R&D tax incentives to help preserve American competitiveness globally. Why is this bill so important?
Well, I spent a lot of time today holding forth about the need for the U.S. to lead the way or continue leading the way in artificial intelligence and synthetic biology and semiconductors. What do all these fields have in common? Well, one of the things they certainly have in common is they're R&D intensive. That's why we lead. We invest a lot in human capital and also in individual, innovative efforts through R&D. And one of the reasons business people invest in R&D is because of the incentive that we've historically for 70 years offered through our tax code. Full and immediate expensing. So immediately you spend $100 and you can write that $100 that year off on your taxes. Right now, to put a fine point on it, China has a super deduction for R&D in their taxes. So if you invest $100 in a China-based company in R&D, you get to write off $200 on their taxes. Because our provision has lapsed, currently, you invest $100 in US R&D, in year one, you only get a write-off, it's like $10 in your taxes. So China has a 20 times more generous tax incentive. Now, I believe in the power and capability and creativity and so forth of our innovators, but 20 times better? I mean, you might be pushing the issue. All right, so we need to support our innovators and our innovative sectors through this tax provision. I think we will restore it as we approach year's end, but there's a bit of a standoff about, we're heavily supported bipartisanly to restore this. I mean, if you're thinking, why would anyone oppose it? No one actually opposes it. There's some who oppose it if a really generous child tax credit is not also approved. That gets into some partisan divides.
That rolls us down to the question and answer session. We're here now, we've got a few minutes, about 10 left. If you have any questions for the senator, now would be the time.
Yes, sir.
About the housing challenges,
Yes.
I had toured the municipalities around this 4-county region, and
Yes.
I was wondering about how you approach the downtown revitalizations and blight elimination programs.
I consider those efforts, and Dan mentioned times we've walked around, but they're additive to mine are additive to theirs. So I listen to the local authorities and local, residents. So I support revitalization efforts. It's not for me to pass judgment on how those are crafted. That's not my area of expertise because I haven't spent a lot of time on it. But if I can provide a tool, a voluntary tool for locals to say, okay, we can, fix up old houses and make it, make the numbers work, I'm gonna do that. So that's what I've done. Sorry if that was too vague, but that's the best I got.
Anybody else? Go ahead, Mr. Wright.
Yeah.
Mr. Wright.
Something we've been studying on with the Ready 2.0 money.
Yes.
Something that just keeps on coming to top is childcare.
Yeah.
And I know that is so far removed from AI and all the different things that we work with, but this is where the rubber meets the road for our counties. Affordable childcare.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to that, we're trying to figure out how to provide that so we can get more people into the workforce, because everybody's hurting for workforce right now. And if we could afford, or we can get affordable childcare in there, does Washington take a look at anything like that? Is that so far down the food chain that you don't?
No, it's not.
Okay.
There is a child care development block grant program, which we made much more generous in recent years. So there are some federal resources available for this. I think it's targeted more towards people of modest means, of course. Aside from that, I individually have been pretty involved in this effort. Put this in the housing affordability category where, people were asking me to get involved. And if you want a functioning, here again, folks will say, well, what's the federal role in that? I take these questions seriously. Our job is to facilitate interstate commerce, and people aren't going to move to where the jobs are. And Indiana's flooded with job opportunities, frankly. You're not going to move to where the jobs are and you're not going to leave your house and go to work in some cases if no one can take care of your kids. And as someone who believes in family values, I think it's pretty important to make sure some of these kids are all taken care of so they can go to work. So I'm like, no, we need to get involved. So number one of the things that we're struggling to do is attract more people into the child care workforce because it's hard, because many of them feel like babysitters because they're unsupported and not members of like a genuine profession. So I've come up with a certification mechanism for child care workers so over the longer term, get more people in the workforce. Number two, there is rightly a lot of focus on daytime workers because most people are daytime workers. What about the Walmart mom or Walmart dad who works a night shift? We haven't really figured that out, so I had some legislation to kind of work through that issue as well. And then lastly, our rural areas have unique challenges because they don't have the same density, of course, that a more urbanized area has. And this farm bill will probably include some provisions which I authored to make someone eligible for a USDA home loan if they want to acquire a structure and fix it up for childcare purposes. So that's not solving everything, but that's sort of my contribution to addressing this issue. If you think there are other things I should take a look at, I'm happy to.
I had another question over here. Yes, Mayor.
So I'm going to go back to the housing because I will say that the low-income tax credits, I wish it had different words because it gives the wrong impression. I mean, most of these are not, they're not Section 8, at least what we've done. We've gotten 4. One's finished, 2 under construction, and a third one that closes in October that was awarded this year.
Yes.
So we've been very active in pursuing those, and we have an application for this round, which would be something that would start next year. Those are a critical piece. The part of the challenge that I've discovered, and this is more of a state question, not every state views those credits they receive from the federal government in the same way.
Yeah.
And the way Indiana is dispersing those in the tax credits are no longer competitive compared to what Michigan, Ohio, and some other neighboring states are doing. So some of the companies that we've had success with are not even submitting applications here. So
Like developers?
Yes,
Yeah.
developers. And we've switched it to where we've got now 5 regions, and each one of the regions will get a certain, I mean, it's so they've switched it around,
Yeah.
and we try and adjust to the rules, but if, I can't believe I'm gonna say this, but it would be helpful if since the feds have the money that's then going to the state for these programs, if the feds told the state that you have to stick to the program.
Sounds like something to carry to your state senator, state reps and.
Oh, I've
and
talked to
governor.
them. I've talked to them all. I've talked to them all.
There's no doubt in my mind.
But anything you can do to accelerate those is the only hope that many of our cities and towns and counties have that are not inside the big city bubbles.
Yeah.
And lost all of our developers and builders, or many of our, I think Delaware County lost all of its developers. We still have builders, but none of them have the funding to put in the streets and the infrastructure necessary. So these tax credits are critical, and I continue to accelerate that if you can. I think it's our hope as
We'll do our part. I would say this, listen, I have my own state level concerns, things I think should be addressed. I don't need to volunteer them here. Maybe some things I think should be done a lot differently. There's going to be a gubernatorial election coming up next year, and I'll personally be connecting with the different candidates and leaning in a little bit more. They're not in office yet. Got to have a vision. Press them on the vision. It sounds a little empty. You know, they're all going to be hooking and jabbing, trying to get support. So, you know, now's the time to shape some minds and perspectives, I think.
Good advice. Any other questions? Seth?
I'd say after last year, there was a lot of bipartisan legislation done, and you were a big part of a lot of it, the CHIPS Act and all these things. And since the election happened last year, like the Congress obviously shifted. Have you shifted kind of like your strategies for how you want to get your bills across the line versus what you were in the last couple of years getting a lot of stuff done, and now it seems like it's slowed down a little bit?
Well, we still have divided government, right? And it wasn't even divided for the last Congress, right? But it was still, it was so close, right? And it's still tight. So I haven't shifted considerably. I may have just shifted what I'm working on. We're focused intently on implementation of CHIPS and science, and it's going pretty well. I mean, there's some barnacles on the vessel, but you do anything that big, it's going to every now and then. I'm working on artificial intelligence now. So all of us got freaked out by ChatGPT, you know, none of us were thinking about that. So we're actively working on that. But no, just my style isn't going to change. Your question's a good one. We had like what everyone was predicting, huge win in the House of Representatives by Republicans, the political dynamics would be a lot different than they are right now. And that might have caused me to think about some different power centers and how I could get some things done differently. But, yeah.
Okay, I know we're going to need to wrap up, and then I'm going to get into the press. Okay, I know he has time in there. I got one last question, and you can wrap it up with your final remarks. But I always ask at the end of these, as local elected officials, what do you see that we need to concentrate locally at the end of this year going into next year? What do you see that we might need to get a better grip on right now that we'll be better prepared by the end of the year, first of the next session?
Well, just in terms of, and I'm not suggesting that you or anyone in the state's not doing a good job, but I just think it's helpful to remember that in this age of interconnection by email and Zoom and so forth, it's still very helpful to meet in person, right? And sometimes that can mean inviting me, and I'm happy to come when I can, I pride myself on being accessible. Erin back there, she can come down if you need something. And so that's important. But just delivering to us some compelling examples of why there are needs in the local community, and so many of you do a great job of this, and how you think I can be helpful is great. Know that this is a time of, we just went through a period, the pandemic, and then over the last couple of years where a whole lot of money's been spent. And so it's going to be tighter for a while. And so you have to be sensitive to that as well. If you come requesting money, at least have a narrative in mind about how it's going to save money if you spend the money, right? But where possible, have some money bundled together from other sources so it shows that you're ahead of the game. So those would be my real points of emphasis right now, but I think this region does a good job. Yeah.
Do you have any last remarks or anything before we move on?
Not unless you feel like everyone needs an onward Christian soldier,
I think I got some of the most competitive ones going in here.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And thank you all for your time and attention. It's a privilege to represent you.
Well, thank you for accepting the invitation. I think everybody enjoyed this, and we'd like to get better. You have done a great job with us when we ever called. Some of you know that we go with the Washington, D.C. fly-in. You've been very receptive to us. We meet with all the senators, the representatives, so please consider it if you've got things coming on. They do listen, and you will take it into consideration. So with that, thank you very much.
Thanks, friends.
Okay, the senator's going to move out with the media for the next 10 minutes. We've got a couple items to finish up, and then we will dismiss so that you can interact and answer questions too. A couple of things on the new business I wanted to go to. We've made a couple of changes, but one thing I need to come up with, I met with, in Delaware County, we've got some RFPs, so I need to get some motions and deal, and what this is the RFP committees. I spoke with the city and I spoke with the commissioners. I would entertain a motion for each of these, or we can do one for all of it, but the city of Muncie, we have to have the 3-member to answer the RFPs and go through. The city has chosen Dan Ridenauer, Ray Allen, and Nate Carroll. And then the county has taken Jessica Piper, Adam Jones, and James King. If there's no objections to any of those, I would ask for a motion to approve.
I'll ask for entertain a motion.
So moved.
Great.
Second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. Motion carries.
Those are good. When you came in, there is a flyer out on the desk. It is for August 25th. It is our first annual golf outing. What is this about? This is about our community outreach. Since the addition of Michelle Batters to our team, I was shown some areas in our county, in our region, that needed some serious attention, and that was the children, the backpacks and going to school. We have not come out of this pandemic as strong as some of you may believe or you have seen. What I've seen really humbled me quite a bit. So we have made some serious donations from the affiliate members and your contributions. Thank you. We were able to help with Delaware, Blackford, and Jay. Please consider the golf outing and sponsorship or a team. 100% of this money will go back to all the kids in these 4 regions. We will move this around from year to year, from one county to the next, but we hope to keep this going to where we raise enough with the businesses and the affiliates that we can help take care of these kids. And it's not just backpacks and book supplies, ladies and gentlemen. I've watched children that don't have underarm deodorant, socks, underwear. There's other things. These are our youth. These are our future. And they're not getting the supplies that they need. We're trying to do our little part for them. So please pick it up. If you can put a team in or do a sponsorship, we would greatly appreciate it. Other than that, Jay, I believe we're at the end.
No old business?
Excuse me?
No old business?
No.
Any roundtable discussion?
Do I have anything?
If not,
Oh, yeah.
go ahead.
Brian McGuire from Jay County. I would like to thank Bill and Michelle. Our Special Olympics is very big in Jay County. We recently lost one of the leaders of Special Olympics. Michelle and I, Bill was talking, and they graciously made a donation to the Special Olympics of Jay County in honor of the lady that passed away. I certainly appreciate that. I consider myself kind of a tough guy, so to speak, but I had happy tears that day. It was very special. I just want to thank you again, let everybody know this program is awesome. I certainly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hey, Bill, just quickly, and this has more to do with the counties than the cities. And rural call is coming up. It'll be due, I think, October or early November, and that's roll call for counties particularly. You all realize that you have the MPOs and the mayor knows he's got an MPO here, but for those people who lie out in the rural areas, there's a rural set of money out there, and those rural calls are going to be due, which means you guys need to start working on that stuff now in order to get it in there. So, and that has to do mostly with infrastructure, bridges in particular. So I know that we've been able to help out Delaware County quite a bit. I think we actually helped the mayor out to get some funding for outside of it. He's inside of an MPO, but we got some roll call for inside there as well. So let's keep that in mind, because you guys need to start thinking about that and you need to take action pretty quick.
Okay,
I have a
thank you.
comment.
Sure.
Is there a motion for adjournment?
About when it comes to bridges over railroads, increasing the amount of those so that there was more safety.
It's all part, you're getting into a larger question, but
Yeah.
the roll call can have that, but there's a lot of federal money that's available for that, so it's a different question.
Yeah, that's a good throw. We'll get into that.
Okay, thank you. Is there a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. I think this is a good one. Senators outside, so please, you have a moment of time? Now's the time.
Even an hour.